Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this broadcast. This is going to be a very special presentation today. Certain things I want to share with you. One, regarding handouts and CLE information. We have materials in the handout tab on the screen that has materials that Jay Jamrock has graciously provided us on COVID-19, vaccine, 2020 workspace, and several other articles that could probably be very interesting to you. He has a slide deck he's going to show us. That slide deck is not on the program, but if you want to get access to it, you can reach out to Susan Wan of the College of Labor and Employment Lawyers, and she will provide that to you. Also on the format in the handout tab is the CLE form, which you have to fill out. Safe Offshore has been gracious enough to agree to sponsor CLE programs. We thank them at this time for doing so. Once you fill the form out, you have to return that to CLE@safeart.com. Once again, that's CLE@safeart.com, using the email address provided in the chat function. Listen, we will provide the CLE code to you guys, so we're around 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the program, or some other secret time we might let you know so we can make sure you attend the whole program, although I have no doubt you will stay mesmerized. I have known Jay Jamrock now for a couple decades, I think, and every time we do a program together, he always just blows me away with the information that he provides. He is most mesmerizing and entertaining in his presentations. Jay has devoted most of his life to identifying and analyzing the major issues and trends affecting the management of people in organizations. He currently, he and his staff currently do research for about approximately 150 demographic, social, economic, technological, political, legal, and management trends. Now, I want to point out to you, Jay, unlike Wayne and I, is not a lawyer. He has no legal training at all. He is someone who's just great at understanding people and how people think, where they're going and what's happening going. He's good at doing research to understand that, and he provides assistance and guidance to over 400 major corporations who reach out to him for assistance and guidance. So he has been very, very gracious to us today by agreeing to be available to give us some insight on that. I also want to share that Jay was an associate editor for the Human Resources Planning Journal, has been a speaker for all kinds of groups, Shoreham, Mayflower Group, the ABA, and a host of other organizations, NELC. He's also taught the labor relations in the School of Management at the University of Massachusetts, and a distinguished lecturer at Duke University and the University of Tampa. We're also joined today by Wayne Allen. Wayne, as many of you might know, Wayne is an outstanding employment lawyer representing individuals in the employment space. He is the founding partner of Alton & Golden. My name is Daryl Gay. I am a partner doing labor and employment law on behalf of management. I'm a partner at the law firm of Aaron Fox. So having said all that, you guys didn't come to hear me or to even hear Wayne, although Wayne and I will do our best to kind of move Jay along occasionally if we think there might be a good question to ask him. And if you have questions, please, the chat box points out, put it in the chat box, and then we'll be doing it. Jay, we know you have a lot of great things to tell us. I'm going to turn this over to you and let you start.
Good. So I was asked to just give a little brief quick thing about what I'm going to be covering today. So I am a futurist. What futurists do is look at trends and see if there's shifts in, of course, I look at the workforce and the workplace and where the trends are impacting that and where are the shifts occurring. 2020 was one of the most profound years I have had in my years of watching trends. We had a major pandemic, which we haven't had since 2018. Which caused a major economic crisis, the likes of we haven't had since 1934, I guess, 32. We had social unrest that we hadn't had since 1968. We had a crisis in our demographic institutions, an assault on the Capitol, which I have never seen. I don't know if anybody's seen. But these are huge, major things, major disruptions, which had caused major shifts in over the last 12 months in the workplace, and the workforce. So I'm going to try to cover some of them. I can't cover them all. This is a year where I have seen more than I've ever seen before, shifts, at least in the last 12 months. A little bit about I4CP. I'm a co-founder of I4CP, and we discover and advance the next practices in human capital. We help companies see what's coming around the corner. We help develop that next practice that will hopefully give them a competitive advantage. And what we mean by, we probably do more research than any other organization in the world. We do tons. And what we try to do is look for who are the high performing organizations. That is, who's the top quartile of revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction over the last 5 years. We like to compare high performing organizations to low performing organizations, those in the top quartile, those in the bottom quartile. Then we try to look at what are the practices that correlate with that market performance. When we find a practice that is highly correlated, but not a lot of people are doing it, we call it a next practice. Most of the things that are highly correlated are what you would call best practices. But occasionally, in every study, we try to see where are the next practices. So we go through the data really rigorously. We do a lot of correlation analysis. We have a lot of dependent variables that we look at to see what is correlated with the dependent variable. We actually build a regression analysis and build models for R-squared analysis too. So that's the geeky part of me. That's what I enjoy on the weekend, is getting into data and connecting dots and telling stories. So we're a data company, but we're also a member-driven company. So our two things are the research and connecting the members. The research by itself does not help companies develop next practices, but the peer-to-peer community does when they start sharing what they're doing. So we excel at both of these. So quick thing on the agenda, I'm going to kind of cover 5 interrelated items. One, of course, is the human-AI connection. This is a research project we did recently, and we've done it before. This is a longitudinal study on technology, AI, machine learning, and its impact on the workforce, and the workplace. We just wrote a book and did a big study last year with about 7,000 companies looking at culture change and culture transformation. We wrote the book called Culture Renovation because we found that very few companies were successful with changing or transforming your culture, but about 15% that were successful were actually just renovating their culture, not really changing it. Then we looked at 2020 and leadership. And what we saw with all our webinars, and we used to do Zoominars, so we did at least 5 a week for our members all through the pandemic. And what we saw was a different style of leadership, a different style of what was happening. And so we did a big study, we just released the results. We're just writing them up right now, called Leadership Redefined. And we wanted to know which leadership behaviors became more or less important and its impact on the workforce. So we actually did correlations on which ones had the best impact on the workforce. Then we looked at the workforce itself and studies around what we're calling the personalization of work. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And also the last thing is we've been doing a continuous study on the well-being of employees. Not just the well-being of the company, but the well-being of employees over the last 12 months. And I'll present some of that data too. So those are the 5 big areas I'm going to hit. I could hit more, but Daryl wouldn't give me 8 hours. So I only got this amount of time. So the first one is this AI and the human AI intersection. We're futurists. So we actually wrote about 20 years a white paper called Cyber Humanity, which looked at the intersection of human beings and technology. But this was a big study that we did with collaboration with a number of different professors looking at this whole thing of AI. I'm not going to go through all the results of that, but the technology is really having a profound effect on the workplace, and workers. The data out there is all over the place. How many jobs will AI, machine learning, and technology replace? It's all over the place. 75 million, 375 million. It's all over. Nobody can predict. But they're also trying to be optimistic and say it's going to create 133 million or so new jobs will emerge. And they're also predicting that 50% chance that AI will outperform humans in all tasks in 45 years. So there's a lot going on here. As in my reading and the way I think, it's going to replace more people than create jobs. Many of the technology jobs that they say will be created by the new technology, the new technology will actually start replacing the tech people themselves. There is automatic AI that will replace managers. So anything that is consistent and predictable can be replaced by AI and machine learning. There's a big controversy around, we had it right in our firm because one of my colleagues is a lawyer, and we were having a big conversation just around the law of the profession and how much AI and machine learning will be brought into the profession itself. Since many of the research is based on precedents, it can all be loaded in, it all can learn, it all can grow, and it can learn as it learns, it gets more information. So it's an interesting time. And the reason why, we know technology has been around for a long time, but the reason why I'm pointing it out this year is that over the last 12 months, we've had more advances in technology than we had in the last 3 years. And a lot of people are predicting we had 5 years of advancing in 1 year. And so the amount of new technology, the new platforms, not just Zoom and things like that, but there's a lot of companies, there's a big trend in companies now around internal talent marketplace. You've heard of gig workers. Well, it's an internal gig marketplace, and they have platforms now that actually use AI to make the internal talent marketplace work. I can talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but it's remarkable the amount of platforms that are being created out there. So
Jay, that raises a question to me. What will people? You might be getting ready to touch on it now because it sounds like in 45 years humans will become extinct.
Yeah. So one of the things as a futurist and as you look into the future is one of the rules is with every trend there are counter trends. Sometimes the counter trends actually take over the trend when usually they merge to create a different reality. So if you're just looking at futurists who are predicting trends, back when I first started looking at the future, they were predicting we should be paperless by now. We should be working only 3 days a week because technology was going to free us all up to have all this free time. The problem is there's counter trends, and that creates a different future than before. So in all the trend watching, it never turns out the way it as a linear projection. And the trend and the counter trend here is the more high tech we become, the more we're human beings, the more high touch we're going to want. So the one thing that has hurt our psychological well-being over the last 12 months has been the lack of high touch that Americans and people around the world have had to endure. The fact that I can't go out with my colleagues and have dinner with my colleagues, or my wife and I can't even go out to dinner. This whole socialization thing is very important. So empathy, compassion, can AI replace that? I have my doubts. And so when you're talking the legal profession, a lot of it is reading a person, looking a person in the eye, reading them, have a little compassion, have a little empathy, and being a human being at the same time. I don't think AI will replace that. So I don't
in the
think
future those horror movies where you used to see man being replaced by machines and they come around and take the world. That's not about to happen.
I don't think so, Daryl. I think I can be pretty sure I can predict that will not happen. The one that with Will Smith in it was pretty good, though. So when we look at the next 5 years, so let's not get 45 years out, but the next 5 years, the World Economic Forum just put out a report over the next 5 years, looking at 2020, 2025. These are the jobs that are going to be increasing in demand, the top 10. They actually put out a whole list of, I think it's a top 50. But these are the top 10. And you can see they all have to do with technology, almost every single one of them. When you look at the top decreasing in demand, all of these are jobs that are consistent and predictable kind of work. So when you look down here, like at mechanics and machinery repairers, or anything to do with assembly and factory work, I predict they're almost all going to disappear. The factory of the future, and this is a joke, and it's not my joke, I stole it from somebody, but the factory of the future will probably have two employees. There'll be a man and a dog. The man will be there to feed the dog, and the dog will be there to make sure the man doesn't touch anything. We already see factories, and I've been in them, where they don't turn on the lights. It works 24/7, no people except for security guards. And, it's very rarely that the lights even go on. So there's just a lot of automation that's going on. Take, for instance, trash collectors. Well, they may not be in existence in the future. We'll have self-driving trucks that will pick up trash. You'll have a sensor in your trash barrel that tells the truck that it's ready for pickup, that it has reached a certain level, and will come and pick it up automatically. There'll be no drivers or anything. So there's lots of stuff that is happening. When you look at the skills, these are the top 10 skills, it's interesting. Only a few have to do with technology. The rest have to do with reasoning, thinking strategically, analytic thinking, being an active learner. Instead of a know-it-all, be a learn-it-all. Have resilience, stress tolerance, be flexible. Creativity, originality, intuition, critical thinking and analysis, complex problem solving, higher level skills than on an assembly line, etc. So these are the skills that are going to need. In this report, this World Economic Forum report, over and over and over, they stress that organizations need to upskill or reskill employees. Not just let them go, which is the tendency, but to upskill and reskill. But we've seen this movie before. I remember when the factories in the Midwest started closing, and there was a big impetus to upskill and reskill those who are losing their jobs in the factories in the Midwest. It didn't happen. I worked with the Obama administration on Upskill America. We were looking at apprenticeships, etc. It didn't happen yet. Working with the Aspen Institute now on upskilling and reskilling. It's just a hard thing to get 45-year-olds to upskill and reskill, not just to learn, but to actually move from one place to another. So when we did our study on automation, only 1 in 4 high-performing organizations, those are the best, the top quartile of what I told you in the beginning, are prepared to handle the capability gap coming from automation and AI. So the gap between the capabilities they have today and the capabilities they're going to need in the future, only 1 in 4 are prepared to handle this. When we look at upskilling and reskilling, high-performance organizations were 5 times more likely to provide upskilling and reskilling. And a key word here is provide. It doesn't mean the employees take advantage of it, because one of the biggest thing is most companies, managers are not developers of talent. They don't get measured on it. They don't get rewarded on it. And there's nothing in there for them to be a developer of talent. So if companies, and we've been saying this for a while, if we need people to upskill and reskill for the jobs of tomorrow, so there won't be a wasteland of people who are not prepared for them, because the blue collar work of the future is not going to be in factories. It's going to be in Amazon warehouses. And it's going to be in all these the Walmart warehouses. There's where the blue collar work is going to be in the future. But if we don't make managers responsible for developing talent, it doesn't happen. They do what they're measured on and rewarded on. And if you're not measuring and rewarding a manager, if you're just measuring them and getting the widget out the door, that's what they're going to do. And so there's a big gap between the need for skills in the future and the organizations that do lip service towards it, but don't do a lot to make it happen. Here's where I think, of course, unions got beat down at the Amazon warehouse just recently. But I have said for years that if unions could actually become the mechanism for upgrading and reskilling employees with the partnership of management, it could have a big impact on society. But there's a big miss there. So before I go on to the next one, I'll see if
could you elaborate that a little bit more, Jay?
Yeah, so I think that for a long time, unions have been missing the boat on what is needed in society from a worker's perspective. They're still living in the past where the terms and conditions of employment and the compensation and benefits are the main thing that they focus in on. And of course, they're more political than they are anything else. And so but if they could move just a little bit beyond the terms and conditions of employment to actually thinking about what is best for my union people, the people I represent. I know these jobs are going to disappear. I can't keep telling them it's not going to disappear. I can't keep fighting for them to hang on to jobs that are disappearing. But what I can do is work with the management, and as part of the terms and conditions of employment, they would invest, and the union would invest together to make the ability to upskill and reskill the workforce together, and actually have a strategy to do that together. There's a missed opportunity, I think, there. That's my opinion. I don't have any research on that, by the way.
Jay, I have a question from left field. Given that
Yeah.
our audience is lawyers, and I know you're not a lawyer and your research doesn't focus on lawyers and law practice, but do you have any general comments about the impact of AI on lawyers and the law profession?
Yeah, everybody knows that a lot of things are going to be starting to change with AI, and they know that. And I think one of the things they're going to question in the future is billable hours. Because I'll tell you a story, and this is not a good story. It's not a good thing about me in particular. And so it's not something I'm very proud of. But my first consulting gig was working for AFL-CIO to cost out contracts for their negotiations. And I charged them a whole $25 an hour. And usually this was a very manual process. They wanted 5 or 6 different scenarios based on different kinds of pay and benefits. Of course, I couldn't touch retirement, but any pay and benefits, terms and conditions. I figured out how to program Lotus 1-2-3 so I could run scenarios over and over again at the blink of an eye. I just had add a figure in and it changed. So the amount of time it took me to do this was 2 hours. I charged them for 80 hours of work because that's what they were used to receiving. So the thing is technology, and that was way back when, the technology allows you to do a lot of things a lot faster behind the curtain that nobody knows about. So anyway, that's not a story I'm proud of myself for doing, but I needed money. I was in grad school. Sorry. Does that sort of answer your question? The whole thing about looking at the future is this. There's sensing, which I'm talking about right now, sensing of changes, sensing things are changing. The next step in the thing is to gain insight from it. And that's your question. What's the insight you're getting from it? That's the question your group should come together and say, what's the insight we're seeing? And the third part is action. What action should we take about it? So sensing that AI and technology and machine learning are going to impact the profession, that's sensing. Now the question is what insights are you going to gain from it? Because it will change the way work is done in the future. And it may change things like billable hours. I know I didn't answer your question directly. Was that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
So Jay, looking
Okay.
at this, and maybe you might be touching on this in a little bit, but as those of us who have children who are getting ready to go to college or in college, is there any, I mean, do you think that the current private, public, charter, even college are preparing our young people for the employments in the future? And if not, what can we do or what should be done to change that equation?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of companies like IBM who think that college degrees and MBAs are useless. Not useless, but they go for more experience and inner learning. And at Microsoft, they say we don't want know-it-alls. We want learn-it-alls. And so, yeah, there's a big gap in our college education. There's too many professors still using their yellow notes that have faded over the years to teach the classes. There's a debate. Does education mean giving people the ability to think, to make decisions, to be human, to be compassionate? Or do we treat it like a trade school and give them a craft like an MBA is? So it's just, even in, Warren Buffett, his degree was in philosophy. It just gave him the ability to think. So there's a debate, and it's been going on a long time. A lot of people say we want these liberal arts students. They learn how to think. A philosophy major is great. A history major, better. Sociology, better. They say it, but they don't do it. They continually hire MBAs out of business schools or undergrads out of business schools, PhDs in business. And they don't have they don't have an ounce of experience to them, but they're making big decisions in organizations.
Hmm.
There is a gap, but it's got to be filled. There's a supply and demand. So the demand out there is, I want tech school kinds of college degrees. So MBA is like tech school. You do certain skills. If that's the demand, the colleges will supply it. They say they want liberal arts students, but there is not that demand. They're not hiring them yet. So, and that's been going on for a long time.
So Jay, I don't know if you've heard of the 110 Coalition. It was just recently started by Ken Chenault, who's a former CEO of American Express, and Ken Frazier, who's the current CEO of what you call it, Merck, where what they're doing, at least for black males, is they're going to be shifting the focus on hiring from people having degrees to skills. To get the issue by black or people, do you think that's something that more companies should be doing, given what you just told us?
Yeah, I mean, even planning. So I run our workforce planning exchange. We're hundreds of companies. We talk. In fact, we're having a meeting tomorrow. It's on workforce planning. All the talk now is around skills, not getting people with just headcount and hiring people, but hiring people with skills or upskilling around skills. So IBM does the same thing. They hire a lot around skills and experience. So there's a lot of things people learn just by life, just by being on the street. I always said that people who sold marijuana were probably the better entrepreneurs we have in the country. Now it's being legalized, but they had to have supply, they had to have demand, they had to have salespeople, they had to have distribution. I mean, they got it all. But we thought of them as criminals. No.
What about?
I'm telling you a little bit about my life because I lived on the street for about 10 years. So it's
you mentioned one of four companies are going to be prepared. A lot of times I've heard in the past that part of the problem that companies are being forced to recruit people from outside the United States to come in with what you call special visas is because the United States doesn't have this sufficient staffing for people and the jobs that are coming available now. Is that still true?
Still true. Most of the people in the different engineering professions today, I think 80% are coming out of Asia. We are not producing engineers in this country. And half of the knowledge that they learn as a freshman is obsolete by the time they're a senior, simply because the education isn't systems in the United States aren't keeping up with the changes that are happening in the real world, real time. Whereas in Asia, they're tending to leapfrog in their education. So, and another phenomena is American companies are going to hurt because even though 80% of the engineers are going to, different engineers are going to come from Asia, they may not live in Asia. They may not want to come to the United States anymore because these platforms that are being formed, you can hire these gig workers, talent from around the world to work on projects. And I'll talk about the project revolution in a minute, but that's one of the other phenomena is you can hire people from around the world and they don't have to come here anymore to work on the projects that you want to work on. So yeah, you're right. That trend is still there, but it is also morphing at the same time, Daryl. So you talk about infrastructure in this country. We're talking a lot about it. The big thing, one of the parts, but a small part, is infrastructure tied to education. And where do you get your education? And the whole upskilling of our country. So let me move on to the second thing. And one of the things we heard even before the pandemic, but especially during the last 12 months, what's happening to our culture? Now that nobody comes into the office anymore or goes through the main lobby and sees all the artifacts of our culture, our awards, our mementos, the pictures on the wall of our founding people and all the other CEOs over the years that are all symbols of our culture. Now we're all at home and we don't see those symbols anymore. And it's been over 12 months. There's been a lot of talk about culture. As a matter of fact, a recent study said that young people will be willing to take a pay decrease to work for the right kind of culture. And so we did a big study around what is a healthy culture? What does it take to renovate a culture to make it healthy? This goes into another, before I get into culture, I just want to mention another part of culture. You see there's a report there we call the new corporate currency. And in that, we did a study around the link between culture, purpose, and brand. We're seeing a shift now where companies now all of a sudden are becoming more purpose-driven, are willing to get out to make social commitments, whether it's DE&I, voting rights, Black Lives Matter. They're willing to make these social commitments out there around the purpose of their company beyond making a profit. Since Milton Friedman in the 70s said the only social responsibility an organization had was to make money for its shareholders. If it made money, then it was creating jobs. That's its responsibility, was to create jobs. That shifted. There is more now in the conference board, not the conference board, it's the organization of CEOs that my CEO is part of, has shifted now, that there is more social responsibility that organizations have. They have a responsibility to not only their employees, their shareholders, but to the communities they serve and society they serve. And you're seeing purpose becoming much more important. And we're seeing people would take a pay cut to work for those kind of companies. We bring these in to speak at our conference, and we had the CHRO of Patagonia talk about their company. Got a virtual standing ovation. That company is phenomenal. You got Oshkosh, not the Oshkosh, the baby maker, but the manufacturer of big equipment. They have made a commitment to their employees first before profits. And it had to convince the board to do that, but it was very committed to the well-being of their workforce and the workplace, and also the communities they serve. So we talk a lot about it, how to build that kind of culture, how to build a culture that people want to live, work, and thrive in. And so does culture translate in performance? We do a lot of work with Microsoft, and you can see since Satya took over, the stock price of Microsoft has gone up and up. If you want hit, read a very good book. His book called Hit Refresh is really, really good. He is a firm believer in being not a know-it-all, but a learning it all. He's a firm believer in having a growth mindset. And he is really, growth mindset. I'll give you a good example of what he meant. We were talking about AI and machine learning. Well, Microsoft created a bot. They call it K. And it would answer questions that came in. It would learn and it was really, really phenomenal learning kind of bot. Until people learned right away that it was artificial intelligence and started feeding it misogynistic and racist terms. And as an answer machine, it would start feeding out answers with racist and misogynistic terms. So they had to pull the plug right away. So one thing to keep in mind with AI, machine learning, and pardon my language, but bullshit in, bullshit out. So it's what it's being taught. It learns. So what is it learning? But anyway, and what Satya did is said, we apologize to our employees, we apologize to our customers, but we will learn from this mistake. And that's called growth mindset. These are, you'll see this, these are the 18 actions for successful culture. There's a whole section on planning, building, and maintaining. You'll get this so you can see this checklist. You can buy the book. The book is really good. Kevin Oakes, who's my partner, is an excellent writer. But there's a couple things here that organizations are doing that is interesting. One is they're measuring more than ever before. What is a healthy culture and what does this mean? And they're not measuring it from outside bottom line profit. The second thing they're doing is they're listening. They're listening to their employees. What are their employees saying? What are they saying about the company? Is this a place that they would refer somebody to? Is this a place that is toxic? What is it all about? Because they want to have a healthy culture. It's more than ever before. It's changing. This COVID thing has changed leadership. And the whole maintaining thing is all about I'm a big fan of B.F. Skinner, and what gets measured gets done, what gets rewarded gets repeated. But having the incentives built in to behave and fit into the culture, reinforce the culture, so the purpose, culture, and the brand all are aligned to create a healthy environment for people to be in, is all about maintaining. I'll stop just there.
A question for you, Jay, has been raised. Do you think, given your point about companies listening, and then you mentioned earlier about collective bargaining issues, do you think that companies would be more interested and open to engaging in bargaining with unions relative to some of the issues that are being raised during this period, whether it be the social dynamic issues or pandemic-related issues?
Yeah, I think there's been a shift, in not all companies, but at least the companies we deal with. There's about 400 companies that we deal with on a regular basis. And we have seen a shift. And I'm going to talk about leadership in just a second, the shifts in leadership. I think they're more open to talking and partnering with union management around some of the social issues that are happening in and outside the workplace. They're more open to it. That's not all companies, though. So there's plenty of companies where the management are terrible. It's a toxic environment, and they don't care about their employees, and they don't care about the union. But there is a shift in a lot of companies, and what we're seeing, which is unbelievable, is young people would rather work for those companies than the companies that will pay them more. They want to work in a healthy environment. So there's just a shift, I think, that has happened in 2020.
So you might address this, Jay, with your discussion about leadership, but we're seeing a lot play out in the press today about companies taking a posture relative to such as the voting issues, and how does that impact on the workplace, the employee relationship trends? Are you going to address that as well?
Yeah, I wasn't going to touch that directly, but it's an excellent point. That is part of the shift that we're seeing. 5 years ago, you would never seen a company take a position like on voting rights or Black Lives Matter or really big issues on diversity, equity, and inclusion. You would have never seen the SEC saying that companies have to report out on human capital metrics. And most of those human capital metrics have to do with DE&I. There is a shift today that there is some systemic problems in society, and organizations are stepping up and saying we can be part of the solution. And now we'll see how far that goes, Daryl. It's just talk now, but in all the companies, when George Floyd was killed, we had a big meeting with all of our DE&I, chief DE&I professionals in our member organizations. We had over 700 people on that call. That's the most call we had during the COVID thing. The call was, how can I say? It was hard to listen to because people were more open about talking about their lives and what happened in their lives, what's happened to their kids, what's happened and the different inequities that are in our society today. And the pandemic has also illustrated where some of the severe inequities are in our society. The inequities around pay. The Milton Friedman approach looks like it's dead. The Ronald Reagan approach looks like it's dead. Give more money to the rich and they will make jobs for the poor. That philosophy never worked, and I think it's change shifting.
So I got another question. You raised a meeting with the DEI folks. There's been some companies that have merged their DEI roles with the head of HR roles. So people are no longer head of HR and someone else is no longer head of diversity, equity, inclusion. They've now got people who are now in the role of a chief people and culture person. Any perspective on that combination?
Not good. The head of culture is a CEO. The DE&I person should not be part of HR. They should report directly into the CEO. And the CHRO's job is to support the culture and the DE&I efforts. It's a support role. When you put it all together, it means that the CHRO has got too much on their shoulders. I firmly believe culture, and all our research says the chief culture person is the CEO. The one who maintains it is the CHRO in HR. For DE&I really to make it happen, it has to be a separate function that reports directly to the CEO and has the funding to make things happen.
Interesting.
And that's how we're seeing it. The companies we work with, not just me, I'm talking about companies we work with, that's what they're doing.
Thanks.
So there's some hope out there, Daryl. The other thing we've seen is a big shift in leadership behaviors. So in December, we did a big study just looking at the shift from 1919 during 2020, what leadership behaviors became more important or less important. This quote from Warren Bennis I've used a lot over the years, and we started looking at leadership and leadership development starting in 1986. And managers are people who do things right. Leaders are people who do the right thing. Since 1986, we used to do a critical issue survey, which looked at about 75 issues, and we would ask the participants to rank them, one in terms of importance, and two in terms of how well they're managing that issue. If you just looked at importance, customer focus would be number one. But since they say they manage it pretty well, the combination of the score made it go down in the pack, about to the middle. But every year, number one or number two was leadership and leadership development. Almost over 85% saying it's extremely important. Under 25% said they do it well. So what I've seen over the years is that companies create environments that grow managers. They want people to be consistent and predictable. They don't want a lot of people running around doing the right thing for their employees. They want to manage by the policy manuals. and do things right. What we saw during COVID, during our COVID calls, was hundreds of examples where managers were doing the right thing. One, I would just give you a couple of examples. One was a manager said of a large virtual, all of a sudden they all became virtual and everybody was homeschooling, everybody was home. And so he did a survey of all his team. It was a pretty big team of what their daily life looked like. Tell me your schedule. When do you homeschool? When do you do this? When do you do that? And he made sure that he scheduled the Zoom meetings for his team around all those personal things that they did. Now that's somebody who did the right thing. That he didn't care that he was doing things right. He did the right thing. One head of learning told me, I don't need a leadership assessment tool anymore. 2020 has shown me who are the leaders of the future. It's like coal becoming a diamond. Coal becomes a diamond under extreme pressure, and it becomes a diamond. What happened in 2020 is we saw pieces of coal become diamonds, but they were different. When we looked at the results of the study, we listed about 69 leadership behaviors. The top 10 of those who became much more important in 2020, there was 4 buckets for them, and they're what I call sort of masters of the obvious. More managers were becoming more aware of the well-being of their employees, the psychological and safety, being empathetic, being more of a human being. There was much more of that. There was much more transparency. So a lot more communication, a lot more understanding, active listening to other people's opinions, and a much more reliance on a digital mindset, both from the manager and the employees. That's a little bit of a masters of the obvious when we looked at those behaviors. But when we looked at those that we had 6 dependent variables: market performance, performance compared to other industries, culture, purpose, engagement, and capability for 2021 and beyond. These were the 6. There was only 6 out of all the 39 that were highly correlated to all 6 dependent variables. The top 2 had to do with agility. And by the way, they had the highest correlation to each of the 6 dependent variables. So when we do the top 10 of each of the dependent variables, number 1 and number 2 were number 1 and number 2 in every category. And it had to do with agility. And it had to do with learning and best practices across the organization, breaking down silos. I don't care how long employees have complained about the bureaucracy in corporate America, how everything's in a silo. You can't get anything done. But everybody was breaking down silos in 2020. Then the next 4 had to do with talent development, being a developer of talent, being a coach, a teacher, a mentor. So there is big hope out there for managers understanding that they need to upskill and reskill their employees and actually leaning in to get them that kind of training and development that they need for their own future. But there was another one issue that came out, and that had to do with DE&I, that we're labeling as the next practice. This, not many people said, was more important in 2020. A lot more performing organizations than low performing organizations. And it had one of the highest correlations to market performance, culture, engagement, and purpose. And that is establishing productive relationships with individuals with underrepresented groups. And I have said for years, this is one of the biggest unconscious biases we have not in corporate America, but in America. We very seldom have relationships with individuals that are different from us. We cocoon within our cultural comfort zone more and more. A year after year, it becomes more evident. We start when we're young, cocooning with friends that are like us. It really accelerates in high school with these cliques, and it's little cultural comfort zones where people come together. It can continue in college, where there's a lot of self-segregation happening in college today. It's forced on you when you're in the workplace because you have to learn about diversity and have an inclusive environment where people feel like they belong. But then you go home to your white neighborhood at night Nowhere are we establishing productive relationships with people in different cultural cocoons. And if we're going to really make progress on DE&I, and it can't be forced camaraderie, but it's got to be some way that we start having relationships with people who are perceived to be different. And once we do, we'll find there aren't that much difference between us.
So Jay,
Yes.
taking that insight and developing an action plan around it, what specific concrete steps might an employer who wants to improve in this area undertake?
Yeah, so there's there's an infographic on the side which has some of the things that we would recommend. It can't feel like it's forced. Forced camaraderie sometimes has a backlash, but you got to get. One of the things we found in one of our leadership development things that had the highest correlation for effective leadership development was placing leaders in employee resource groups of people who were different than that person. So actually putting them in a group, and you can't force it. It has to be a volunteer thing, but it really had the highest correlation with leadership development. I think there's a lot of ways you can bring the organization together to work on projects outside of the companies. You see a lot more companies going into some of the underserved parts of the communities to start, whether it's fixing houses, delivering food, whatever it is, are ways to get people together to start saying, yes, and I can have a relationship with somebody if that person isn't as different as I thought they were. In fact, we're more like each other. But you have to look for the opportunities. The worst thing corporations are doing now is forcing people to go through training, forcing people to learn about their unconscious bias. Yes, I understand it, but there's very little correlation with success by forcing them to go through these courses. The thing is, you've got to set up an environment that brings people together naturally. Such as having managers who set up these kinds of things, group meetings. So when you have a training, say we're going to go back someday to have face-to-face training, face-to-face development. How do you put people in the class? You got to be very strategic about it so that you have people from different backgrounds all working together on projects in a classroom situation. That's one way. The second way is with project revolution that's happening in the company. Be very strategic around the different kinds of people that you put on projects so they can start developing relationships together, working on a common thing. When you have volunteer kinds of things, the work in the community, be very conscious of building teams that are very different from one another so that you're not working together and start collaborating together. It's got to be a conscious thing that people volunteer for. It doesn't feel like you're being forced to learn something, but you're being put into an environment where you do learn from other people.
Okay. So Jay, another question was raised. There is a lot of reports out that tech companies are rejecting applicants because they don't fit the quote unquote culture of the company. But these same also failing in any suggestions of how there could be a solution to that issue?
Yeah, I mean, this happened before, Daryl. I'm old enough to remember when culture fit was a huge issue decades ago. Mm-hmm. And most cultures were white male cultures back then. And so the culture rejected people who were not like the white males that were in the culture. So again, you've got to be strategic and intentional around the kind of culture you want. And what you're seeing is more companies are coming. So what we're training people around culture is there are many cultures inside a company. So the culture that's in the Boston office is different than the culture that's in the Hong Kong office or the San Francisco office or the Paris office, even though you're one company. The culture at the top of the organization is different than the culture at the bottom. Everything is layered. The culture in HR is different than the culture of engineering, the culture in sales. Those are all different cultures. That's good unless they're toxic. Don't bother. But what's the overarching culture and purpose of the whole company? And if it's DE&I related, then the culture and the purpose of the company starts to change. One of our members is Capital Partners out of Washington, D.C., and it's a for-profit investment organization that only invests in minority companies, minority housing projects, etc. Even they, although their purpose is a very big DE&I purpose, have trouble inside the organization really driving it as part of their culture. But that's what you got to do. It's got to be something that. So Herb Kelleher talked about culture this way. Culture is what people do when no one is looking. So if your culture truly values DE&I, people will be doing and getting these relationships even when nobody's looking, when you're at home, it's a very hard thing to do, but you can do it. So I sound like a preacher, I know, but Daryl knows this, but I'll tell you another thing about me. I have an interracial marriage. My wife is Asian, and I worry, and we've been married 45 years. But I worry more today about her going outside by herself than ever before. But even she cocoons within our cultural comfort zone. It's remarkable how much that's a human condition. And we live in a very diverse neighborhood on purpose. But we've got to break through this. So we call this a next practice. I'm sure there's a lot of chatter on what I just said, but I think it's a huge issue today. I think also what we're seeing is the personalization of work over 2020. And what I mean about this, employees want more flexibility and control around what they do, how they do it, and where they do it. This whole working at home, distant working, and it's only about 42% of the workforce that were sent to work out of their home. But they were given more control and flexibility around what to do, how, and where they do their work. This is becoming a norm. This is what they want today. This is what, if you don't let them have it, those companies that are going to order people back to work, no, people don't want to work for that kind of company. I want to come to work because sometimes I want to socialize. Sometimes I want to work at home. Sometimes I want to work from Starbucks. So what? So long as I'm getting my work done, why do you care? So what we're seeing is a lot of personalization. I'm not going to read all this. But many companies have a laser-like focus on the individual. In fact, job descriptions are going away. It's going to be meeting with a manager and rewriting your job description over and over and over again as the work you do changes. There's going to be a personalization of the experience you have in an organization, especially as managers become developers of talent. It's going to be managers personalizing the development of their individual employees more than ever before, because they care more about the well-being of that and the future, not only of their workforce, but of society. This leads to another trend we're seeing is that work reimagined. I call it the project revolution. And we're moving away from jobs to work and skills. And so jobs, planning for people to fill jobs is going away. It's still there, but the headcount planning is still there, but there's more emphasis today on work-based planning and skill-based planning than ever before. So it's not only about the new way of looking at work, but it's also a new way of looking at sourcing talent.
Can you go back a little bit, Jay, on that? Can you go back a little, Jay, when you're talking about in the screen before, when you talked about moving away from jobs to work and skills, can you elaborate a little more what you mean by that?
So you see the picture of the director. So it's a Hollywood model where you have a project and you bring actors over here, engineers over here, lighting people come in, only to work on that project. Once that project is done, they go back to whatever they were doing before. So it's like an internal gig market. So you could have a job, but you could also be working on 3 or 4 projects. Where the work, what happens is with a project, you deconstruct the work that has to be done in the project. And so you need lighting assistants, you need actors, you need this. There's different kinds of workers for a project. Then you source out inside and outside the company for people to have those kinds of skills that can do that kind of work for the project. And they come together for that purpose, and then they dissipate afterwards. It's called the internal gig. It's called the inside gig. It's the internal talent marketplace, and it's merging with the external talent marketplace. So remember before I said you can source people from around the world today. They don't have to leave their country to work on it. These external platforms today, especially with the high-tech work and the engineering work, are part of, can have an internal job market where you can get people from all parts of the company to work on a project. But I can go to the external place and I can actually crowdsource the kind of talent I need to do the job or to solve the problem. NASA does this. The government does this. They do more crowdsourcing of solving problems and doing projects than ever before. In fact, NASA, and I'm going to get this story wrong, they had 3 or 4 scientists that were looking at the sun. And I'm going to get the story wrong, so if I get it wrong, I apologize. But they were looking at sunspots and the frequency of them because it greatly affected the astronauts when they were outside of the, space thingy they have, walking around. And they spent millions of dollars researching it. And they came up with a formula that says we can predict with about 50% accuracy when sunspots were going to happen. Well, they decided to crowdsource it. And there was this person working out of a garage in New Jersey who within a few hours came up with a formula that was 90% accurate. So being able to crowdsource work, solving problems, getting engineers or tech people from around the world, and they never have to leave their job. 3M does this. They do this internally and externally. So they have 5 different brands, and they're all around the world. Whenever they have a project, they know exactly where the talent is internally and externally. And they use AI. There's AI platforms one's called Gloat, the other called Hitch, that actually has AI that will search internally and externally for the talent you need for specific jobs that have to be done. So not all jobs are going away, but more and more the jobs are being deconstructed into the different kinds of work that has to be done for the jobs. And then they're going out and find technology to some of that work. Can I gig work it out internally? Can I use the internal marketplace to fill that work? So it's thinking very differently about where people are going to come from. So it's not only the work, so it's looking at work differently to deconstruct it into separate parts, but also looking at talent. And this is the talent ecosystem. So when companies today in our group are looking for talent, they look for it everywhere. So they deconstruct the work. So you can have an internal talent marketplace, an external talent exchange, a collaboration with agile teams, actually collaborating with other companies too. So what the hell is the name of the company? Huge company, builds bridges, dams, everything. Anyway, the story is irrelevant, but they're huge and they're very innovative. And they developed a hearing aid for children, where their business is not to sell products to children. They sell products to government. So big things like dams and airports and bridges and things like that is what they build. One of the things they built was Disney World and the big attractions that they had there. And so they had a relationship with them. So they went to Disneyland, and Disneyland actually gave them their marketing team and developing a marketing product for this hearing aid for children that became a huge success. So sharing talent is happening everywhere, and it's happening more and more. So you can crowdsource talent. You can partner with other companies. You can use robots, AI. You can co-ops, internships are still big. There's a lot of overlooked talent pools today that they're tapping into. So, like you just mentioned, the one where you look for skills and experience rather than degrees. These are overlooked talent pools. So this whole talent ecosystem is changing in America and around the world. It's a phenomenal thing. In fact, we're having a big meeting tomorrow just on this, looking at headcount planning, work planning, skill planning, and how much they're very different, what companies are doing. What we do with all our studies, we will do case studies, and you can see the different companies that are listed here. The last one I'm going to talk, and I'll talk about quickly, is the well-being of employees. 2020, we saw corporate America all of a sudden become human. We saw managers become human. We looked inside their homes. They looked inside our homes. We had Zoom meetings galore. The cat walking across the keyboard, and we have one employee, this happens all the time. All you see is the tail when it walks across the tail. But it's a joke, having kids in the meetings or interrupting meetings, having dogs bark at one during meetings. These are all things we would never accept in the past, but we accepted this year. So it's the well-being of employees became very important. And when we looked at these in 2020, the whole person well-being, at first I was a little skeptical around this sort of tree hugger kind of thing. But it's became huge, and I think it's actually growing even beyond the well-being of employees. It's becoming the new social responsibility. So they have the well-being of employees is important. The well-being of the company and the culture it creates is very important. But also the well-being of the community they serve is becoming important. And with our study on well-being, we saw high correlations to market performance in all three of these categories. It actually was a study we did in 2005 where we looked at people, profit, and planet. And so that companies that were investing in both people, profits, and planet had high correlations to business success than other companies. This study was the same thing and found those that really invested in the well-being and its whole person well-being. That means the community, that means the company's culture, that means the person themselves become very important. And when we did the leadership behavior stuff, employee well-being.
Okay, before you go there, can you go back, Jay, a second? When you're going back to the well-being issue, companies are facing a major issue right now. And I wonder if you could spend a few minutes talking about the following two things. One, the issue of vaccinating or not vaccinating or requiring vaccination of their employees. All right. And the second is, for the last year, several people working remotely. And now companies keep talking about either returning to work, moving forward, bringing people back to work. Can you spend a few minutes discussing the whole issue, what you've seen in your analysis of people about the concept of the idea of continuing people working remotely versus having people work to call it back to work? And I guess it ties into the well-being concept as well to a certain degree. Because a lot of people say, I prefer working back in the office. What have you seen in your studies?
So we're doing some of the results of those studies I sent you in your group. So you have some of this. The vaccination issue, it's in discussion a lot right now in companies. Do we require vaccinated people to come to the office? Is that right? There are lots of exceptions to vaccinations. There's religious exemptions. There's personal exemptions. There's different health exemptions for vaccination. One of our colleagues has a severe allergy that can kill him. He has to carry an EpiPen around with him all the time. He cannot get vaccinated. So do we have a vaccination policy if we want to meet together and go to dinner together? Right now, corporations are saying we're thinking about it, we're talking about it, but we don't think we're going to have a vaccination policy. Now, here's the kicker. If OSHA comes out with a policy around vaccinations, that will change everything. So if OSHA says for the safety and health of workers in the workplace, you will be vaccinated. There will still be exceptions, though. We have exceptions in every state around vaccination of kids going to school. there are exceptions. So it's a tricky, the vaccination thing is tricky. The going back to work, going back to the office thing is going to be tense. It's going to, and the result of it is going to create a tense employee kind of relationship. So there are half the workforce that was never working from home. And they had, they were people who had to come to work every day. About half of them, the workforce was about 42%, actually had to work at home. Now, as they come back to work, people want more control and flexibility around where they work, when they work, and how they work. So our company's going to bend and be more flexible around when people come to work. Why? What's the sense of having the office? What is the office for? Could it be for collaboration or innovation? Do we have office hubs where people meet in small groups in office hubs? We're doing a survey where the results are almost done now, where half of the respondents have been from outside the United States, but over 1,000 respondents looking at that very issue, Daryl. What does it mean to be flexible going forward as the offices open? And right now, they don't even know how to define it.
How do you bridge the whole issue, or what have you seen on bridging issues with the, as you said, the advancement of technology, which in some ways AI has somewhat eliminated the need for some employees with this issue of remote working versus returning to working? Have you seen anything, trends coming out of that?
So it depends on what how consistent and predictable the work that the person was doing from at home. There's been a shift from looking at the hours people put in to the output of the employee. So when I first started in 1986, I started remote workers, and the only thing I required was the quality and quantity of research being done on time. I didn't care when you did it or how long it took. We agreed on a time frame, and if you got your project done on time, the quality and quantity, that's all I cared about. You could work on the beach. I could care less. So the technology allows companies to do the wrong thing. It allows them to monitor you in your house without you knowing it, to monitor when you turn on your laptop, when you use it, when you monitor everything. And companies, remember I told you, people would rather work for a healthy culture than one that's toxic. That's a toxic culture. And managers are going to want to do that because they don't trust that people will work. In fact, it's a human kind of condition. We're going to have managers still that don't trust that people working at home actually work. And you're going to have at home that don't trust the employees in the office because they have the boss's ear. And so they're getting preferential treatment. Carbon-based life forms can be very complicated kind of things. And there's lots of human things that happen. So there's going to be conflict between, especially as we personalize work, between those who are required to come to work, those who may have the option to stay at home or come to work. There may be some companies that there's been a lot of talk about 3-2-2. So 3 days in the office, 2 days off, and 2 days at home work. And you choose which of your 3-2-2. You can choose them the way you want. So there's just this preferential treatment. There's always going to be this thing that, Daryl, you got a better deal than me. For some reason, I don't trust that. I'm getting screwed. Daryl's got a better deal than me. And that's going to put a lot of tension in the workplace. I don't know how we're going to handle that. Because before, the one size fits all, everybody's got to come to work. Everybody's got to work their 8 hours or whatever. Everybody goes at the same time. Everybody comes into work at the same time. That was good because one size fits all. We didn't have to worry about all the stresses and strains and all the personal stuff that people do. But this new work environment is going to be very hard to navigate.
Have you seen any models from some of the companies you've interacted with that might be a good solution or really a good model that other companies should emulate?
They're starting to develop them. Most companies are still experimenting with different models, so they're just some that have been in countries where COVID has been more under control. We're seeing some models with a hybrid of working in office and working at home. We're slowly, most of the companies we deal with right now don't require employees to come to work yet or to even travel. So they're being cautious. And so there's a lot of talking, a lot of thinking. I don't think there's a model yet because we're not there yet.
Have you
So,
seen,
Jay,
Mike? Good, Wayne. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it seems to me it's been true for a long time that, particularly in service businesses, but others too, that the key is talent, finding, attracting, retaining talent. But it seems like the 5 themes that you've articulated today, each of those was important before, but each of those has been accelerated by the pandemic over the past year. Are there any of those 5 features that you described that you think the pandemic has radically changed as compared to more or less accelerating what was already good practice?
That's a great observation, Ray. Most people don't pick up on that. But the fact that these had been ways of attracting talent in the past and that they've accelerated during the pandemic is something most people don't pick up on. But yeah, it has definitely happened. I see the biggest change in 2 different places. One is leaders who have been successful during the pandemic, in other words, have still had a good culture, still would have had a productive environment. Have changed. They've become more human. They have more empathy. They have more compassion. If you look at the next slide, this slide, these were the top 4 in the leadership behaviors of ones that became more important in 2020. And you can see that in between is physical and psychological safety. Yeah, okay, I understand that. But creates a sense of community, collection, and belonging among the workers. That was number 1. And over 90% of the companies said that became the number 1 most important leadership behavior in 2020. And then number 4 shows empathy and compassion towards others. My hope is that over this last 12 months, employees especially, have begun to expect this kind of behavior from the leaders. And those leaders, and we have seen that actually produces results. I think there's going to be a shift in how leaders lead and manage people. I hope. I also think there's a shift in corporate America and how they're viewing their place in the world and their place in society. When you see the CEO of, not Amazon, what is it? I forget which one, said, yes, I'll pay higher taxes to make the infrastructure better. Of course, he doesn't pay any taxes now anyway, but that's irregardless. But when you hear statements like that, I see a shift in how corporations are putting their stamp on social issues. And those who are putting the wrong stamp are getting punished. So those are the 2, I think. I don't have a lot of faith in this upskilling and reskilling, simply because I don't think right now we have managers that are measured and rewarded on doing that. We don't have a plan for people to move out of the coal mines in West Virginia to a suburb of a city to take on a tech job. Because 1, they can't sell their house. 2, we just don't have the infrastructure to upskill and reskill the workforce. If the unions and labor and management could partner on this, I would have a lot more hope.
Hey, before you go ahead any further, for those wanting CLE credit, the code for today's program is SS3258. One more time for those who want CLE credit, the code is SS3258. Again, to go in the chat feature, download the CLE form, fill it out, and return it to cle@sci-fi.com. I'm sorry, Jay.
So when we look at, I don't think the changes we had in the last 12 months are done yet. The COVID crisis is not finished. We have not got herd immunity. The variants are out there. We just got a pullback from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. But the worldwide pandemic, vaccinating everybody around the world will take 3, 4, 5 years. They say 2024 before everybody gets vaccinated, meaning the COVID crisis could continue for a while. I have more promise for the American economy if we can get some sort of 60 to 70% vaccinated. I think the economy will be rip-roaring if we can get to that, but that won't happen until 2022. The systemic racism we have and inequality in our society are issues we have been dealing with for decades. They're not going to go away overnight. And I'm afraid it's going to, it's only going to get worse before it gets better. The whole thing around the crisis within our democracy and how we escaped with safeguarding our democracy, those issues have not gone away either. And so we are still living in a time of very much uncertainty. And you don't, as a futurist, you really, if I was a good futurist, I would be a multimillionaire and retired years ago. So you really cannot predict the future. But what you can do is you can sense what's happening out there. Have a dialogue with your colleagues around the insights you're getting around what you're seeing out there. And then take action in your profession if you think it's needed. So sensing to insight to actions.
Jay, you've given a lot of conversation today. I think a lot of people might be say this really fits very well with the company that has employees in corporate offices such as law firms or other businesses. What about essential services? Any thoughts about trends that are affecting essential workers, essential services where there's less flexibility?
Yeah, so there's a lot of concern, especially even within the member organizations that are huge. They have a lot of essential workers that have to come all the time to the workplace. And then you got the stores opening up and the box stores and things like that. There's not a lot of answers right now, Daryl. There's just, they know it's a concern. One, their emotional and psychological thing that they've been through the last 12 months. Just knowing that they could pick up the COVID and come home and kill grandma. That's heavy. And so there's a lot of talk about how do we make essential work more flexible or more adaptable so that it can be a more safe environment. I don't think there's a lot of answers right now. I know it is a concern, though.
So I have a sort of prosaic question in a way, and that has to do with the part of employment that's not just about a nice place to work and a nice culture, but about your pay. And
Yep.
So with reference to the Fight for 15 and the Biden administration's commitment to try to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and with many states increasing the minimum wage far above the federal level, what is your prediction about the impact on this movement to increase the minimum wage, increase the living wage on the workplace, in addition to all the more soft features that you've been talking about today?
Yeah, so this becomes, there's a political divide on the answer to that. There's a whole section that says that when you increase wages that much, and of course it's not going right to $15, it's always phased in, even Florida, California, and other states that have passed $15 minimums. It's always phased in over the years. But they say if you go to $15 an hour, you'll either have to hire less employees or raise the prices on the products and services you provide. So there's that argument. In Seattle, I love staying at the Pan Pacific in Seattle. It's a beautiful hotel. It's a nice hotel, but they're so low on staff because they have to pay $15 an hour. They cannot fully staff the hotel, so you don't get all the services you have, like 24-hour room service. The security guard ends up running the kitchen at night. It's a mess. But it doesn't have to be like that. If you plan carefully, it can actually not increase prices as much as they say. You can fully staff and actually have people have more money to spend, so you create, a growing economy. That's the other side. So I don't know how you live on $15 an hour. I really don't.
So Jay, when that's
maybe I'm just spoiled, a bit spoiled, but I couldn't afford my wine.
So Jay, there's another argument that side of the coin. People raise the question, a lot of the $15 an hour is sort of out the fast food workers concept, and they should make more than at least $15 an hour. And historically, at least when I was a kid and you were kids, those fast food jobs were the entry-level jobs to young people getting their first job. And what you said earlier about the change in dynamics and what people need, the skills to survive, is the focus wrong in the sense we're worrying about making sure people who work get $15 an hour versus making sure people have the right skills and training to get the right jobs?
It's a little bit of both. I agree with you, Daryl. I mean, I understand that the jobs at McDonald's are not the entry-level jobs anymore. People have those jobs for a long time. Having the skills and having the pay, I don't want to run down, there's the progressive side of the political area where we have to move more towards an equity kind of environment where the pay is more equitable, that the pay of the CEO has to be more in line. It can't be $145 million and the employee only gets $15 an hour. There's that inequity that has progressed ever since Milton Friedman started the whole economic movement, and it became a political economic movement to give more money to the rich, give them tax breaks, etc. And we have had stagnated wage growth in this country for a long time. Our country used to be on the surveys, worldwide surveys, would be rated as the place where you could move up the social ladder, where you could really climb the social ladder and go into middle class and upper class, and you could, generation after generation, you keep moving upward. Surveys right now worldwide say the United States is not that kind of place. You're not seeing the social mobility. People, the inequity in pay is, making it so you're not seeing that social mobility where people can get into middle class and above middle class anymore. So this becomes more of a political conversation a lot than it does a trend watcher kind of conversation. We watch the political a lot because, a lot of, whether it's Democrat or Republican, the kind of cabinet positions that are filled will drive a lot of the discussion in the work environment. The NLRB, who's on that board becomes very important. Who's in OSHA, who's in, the myriad of different cabinet positions. But it's a Republican or a Democrat will have big impact on the workplace. So we watch it, but I try to be very careful about answering political questions like that.
So Jay, I think we're really at the wrap-up time period. So are there any more last minutes sage words of wisdom you want to give the audience?
Yeah, so don't jump off of bridges just because of what I say. I think I am hopeful. I think we are turning to a different era in corporate America and for employees and in corporate America. I'm very hopeful on a lot of fronts. It's going to take the rest of this year to get through it. But I'm looking forward to March of next year to be in Scottsdale, Arizona, sitting at the corner of the bar, holding court in the corner of a bar with a bottle of wine. And I think that's coming.
Jay,
Thank you, Jay.
Sorry, Wayne, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I just want to say this is wonderful, and thank you so much. I look forward to getting the slides so I can read them and digest them more thoroughly than I was able to on the fly during the presentation today.
Yeah, by the way, my email address is on the first slide. So I put my email address there. So if people want to yell at me, I'm open to it. I really like, though, to hear other people's sensing and where they're seeing shifts. And so I love those kind of discussions. So my email's there. Hopefully it won't go into junk mail and we can continue a discussion.
So I want to thank Jay Jamrock on behalf of the College of Labor and Employment Lawyers for participating in the program. Thank Wayne, audience taking time to listen today. I'll remind everyone who's wanted CLE credit that the code is SS3258. Again, thank you for being part of this program. Thank you, Jay. Have a great day, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Daryl.